This is chapter 4, which is called Gamma Waves and ESP. The second night at the Forever Family Conference, where I presented with Janet Meyer, I had several dreams. This is significant because I rarely remember my dreams. This one was vivid and distinct. It was one of those dreams that, when it happens, makes you say to yourself, I need to remember this. Dreams like this have a feeling like something is happening beyond a random firing of neurons or memory consolidation. In this dream, I found a bird that had been injured and was unable to fly. Toward the end of the dream, I held the bird in both hands and made up and down movements with my arms, attempting to give the bird the feeling of its wings moving up and down, catching the air. I did this for some time, and then at the natural place in the movement cycle, I let the bird go. The bird did not fly. It landed on the ground, but not hard. It was like it was able to gain some friction with the air, at least enough to minimize the impact of hitting the ground. I wasn't sure what, if anything, this meant, but it stuck with me all morning. After breakfast, I met Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell. She is a psychiatrist training at Johns Hopkins University, and I was previously on the faculty at Harvard. She was one of the guest speakers at the conference and author of the book ESP Enigma. We ended up walking together back to the auditorium where the conference was being held. During the walk, we stopped at a water feature to watch a hummingbird bathing itself. Dr. Powell proceeded to tell me a story about a time that a young raven had fallen out of its nest onto her front walk. She took it and built an area for it and provided toys for entertainment. Her intention was to release it back to her yard since that's where it was born. Once the raven was fully fledged, she tried to help it fly but was not able. At this point, she contacted the bird sanctuary to give it a permanent home and additional care. As she was telling the story, I was a little freaked out. The timing of this was very conspicuous. Her story and my dream were extraordinarily similar. Could it have been a coincidence? I suppose. Were the stories identical? No, but it felt meaningful, as if in full of meaning. So what was the meaning? What is the point? I was supposed to do something with Diane? Was this the signal we were connected in some way? Was this just a clue that such things are possible, or maybe that I'm capable of having psychic experiences? I have no idea, but interestingly, after the conference, Diane and I began discussions about collaborative research, which manifested nearly 8 years later. Fast forward 1 year, I was returning home from a trip to New York where I was working with 4 different mediums over 2 days. Hold on. I flew into St. Louis. Is it St. Louis or St. Louis? I think it's St. Louis, where I was supposed to catch a shuttle back to Columbia, Missouri, which is nearly 2 hours away. Unfortunately, my flight home was delayed, which caused me to miss my shuttle, which happened to be at the last shuttle of the night. The shuttle company was closed, and I knew I would not be able to get another one until the next morning. Fortunately, my dad lives in St. Louis, and he graciously came to rescue me from a long night at the airport. Before going to bed at his house, we made plans for the next morning. Knowing that I would wake much earlier than he would, he gave me the keys to his car so I could go to the local coffee shop, have breakfast, and make arrangements for my trip home. The next morning, I left during the morning rush hour for the 2-mile trip to Panera. As I turned onto the main road, the woman in front of me began to pull out and then stopped. I was looking to my left for any oncoming traffic, didn't see her stop in time, and smashed right into her back end. No one was hurt, but I was frustrated and embarrassed. After exchanging insurance info and getting my coffee and bagel, I returned to Dad's house to deliver the news that I had wrecked his car. After the initial surprise wore off, he said, I had a premonition about that. When I inquired further, he described a dream he had sometime during the night or early morning that involved me, his car, and the car being wrecked. He seemed a bit surprised when he realized this and commented that he could have had the dream/premonition at the same time as the accident. This was interesting because my dad is super skeptic. In fact, every time I talk to him about this branch of my work, he acknowledges the possibility that some people may be able to access knowledge from an unknown source, but is also clear that he generally doesn't trust people who claim to be psychics or mediums. I joked that he was psychic, which prompted him to tell me another story. Many years earlier, he woke up suddenly one morning and knew that my sister, who lived in another state at the time, was going to show up the day for a surprise visit. That day for a surprise visit. As far as he could remember, there had not been any clues that this might be a possibility. Not only did the dream seem random, but the feeling behind it was so strange that Dad got up and started cleaning the house, convinced that Nikki would show up unannounced. And when she did later that day. This kind of experience is common and often occurs for people at the time of a crisis. In fact, the founders of Forever Family Foundation, Bob and Fran Ginsberg, had one of these experiences their day the daughter was killed in a car accident. Bob told me the morning of the accident, Fran woke up in a panic. Bob helped her calm down and asked what was wrong. She said that something bad was going to happen today, but no specific details. Even though Bob was generally skeptic of information that came in this manner, he had already witnessed Fran's ability to know things on several other occasions. Throughout the day, Bob checked on all three of his kids several times to make sure they were okay. The day passed without incident, and the entire family went out for dinner. After dinner, their daughter Bailey rode home with her brother. Bob and Fran were following them back to the house and came upon the accident. Both kids were severely injured and rushed to the separate hospitals. Their son was in a coma and suffered significant head injuries, but eventually recovered. Their daughter died 2 hours after the accident. This ability to see and feel into the future events is more common than we might imagine. In fact, a YouGov survey of 1,189 U.S. adults found that over one-third of the respondents reported experiencing a premonition or accurate prediction of the future. And this was 2017. Clearly, this isn't an ability that is limited to a select few. What is going on here? How can we tune in to the feelings or events that we should not know about? Events that have not yet happened. Carl Jung termed such experiences synchronicities, which he defined as a meaningful coincidence of outer and inner events that are not causally connected. And this was 2010. The case above, the dream's inner event were connected to specific events that happened later the same day. Outer event, it says in parentheses. The reason that such connections are possible may be related to the concept of quantum entanglement. Essentially, this theory, applied to psychic phenomena, suggests that the mind is not just a product of neural firing, but is actually connected to all information throughout space and time. Under the right conditions, the mind can access bits of this information and translate it in an internal thought, image, or feeling. If this theory is accurate, it would explain not only how these abilities are possible, but also why some people seem more tuned in than others. If the brain is essentially a receiver of information from the universe, then it makes sense that some brains may be more naturally adept to accessing or translating this information. It also makes sense that we may be more open to this type of information during altered states of consciousness, such as deep sleep. The information is there, we simply must figure out how to connect and listen. While psychic events like those described above are often spontaneous, occurring during sleep, I was interested in exploring the conscious ability to tap into this universal field of information. In addition, I wanted to approach this from a more scientific perspective. As compelling as the dream premonition stories are, there are no current methods to demonstrate that these are statistically meaningful or real beyond mere coincidence. Alright. The easiest and most well-researched approach to testing psychic skills involves using of a specialized deck of cards named after their creator. Perceptual psychologist Carl Zener, PhD. The Zener deck is made up of 25 cards. Each card contains one of 5 possible symbols, including a circle, square, cross, star, and wavy lines. The idea, circle, square, cross, star. The idea is to shuffle the deck and then predict each card in turn. This type of format is typically done to test telepathic abilities. One person, which is the sender, looks at a random card attempting to send the information to the other person, the receiver, who will then make their prediction. Because there is 1 in 5 chance of simply guessing the correct card, someone would need to do significantly better than a 20% hit rate for the results to be considered meaningful. In a typical research study using Zener cards, the sender and receiver would go through a deck of 25 cards numerous times, resulting in hundreds of trials. The more trials, the less likelihood that any significance findings are due to chance. Later, researchers shifted using computer-generated symbols, which simplified many elements of the process, as well as providing much more control of the experimental design. Between 1935 and 1987, there were 309 studies examining both clairvoyance and precognition using computer-generated symbols or cards. The combined results of these studies resulted in odds against chance of 10 to the 25th power to 1. Another examination of forced choice psi research was published nearly 10 years later. In this meta-analysis, the researchers examined 22 studies published between 1935 and 1997. They reported clairvoyant effects with odds against chance of 400 to 1 and precognition effects with odds against chance of 1.1 million to 1. Clearly, variations of the Zener card method have been successfully used to measure psi abilities for decades. Perhaps this would be a good method for testing my own abilities. What, babe? I didn't have a Zener deck of cards, but I did have a knockoff version that was gifted to me by a friend. He knew I was into all this weird stuff, and he gave me a board game that must have been sitting in his basement for 20 years. It was called Kreskin's ESP and was mostly geared toward using the pendulum to answer questions about the future. The game also contained a deck of 25 cards, 5 cards each of 5 different colored circles: red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. I decided to use these for my self-experimentation. Since I didn't have anyone to run telepathy tests with on a constant basis, I decided I would just shuffle the deck and attempt to read the cards with my psychic abilities. I would draw the top card, stare at the back of it, attempting to visualize the color of the circle and the other side.
Talk.
It's tough.
Talk.
You have to make the Once I made my prediction, I would flip the card to check my accuracy. If I was correct, I would place it in the right of the pile, and if I was incorrect, I would place it to the left. At the end of the 25 cards, I would calculate my hit rate and then documented it. I decided I would do this every day to get a solid baseline of my psychic ability. As any day could be good or bad, it was important to have lots of trials over lots of days. This was the only way to get an accurate picture. However, I learned very quickly that there are certain advantages and disadvantages to using a deck of cards for this type of experiment. Yep. When you have a known quantity of each card and you see the results of each trial, it is very difficult for the logical analytic part of your brain to get out of the way. It really wants to predict what will happen next. For example, if 3 of the first 5 cards happen to be yellow, some part of your mind is going to tell you there's no way the next card is yellow. This natural inclination can get in the way of simply listening. Good job, baby.
Stop.
Yeah, it's stop. On the other hand, the fact that this predictive tendency is so strong provides a great opportunity to observe this process and learn to approach each card as if it were the first of the deck. Essentially, this practice becomes a psychic training exercise to learn from the subtle differences between prediction and intuition. To find a solution to this productive problem, I started looking for computer-based psychic tests. To find a solution to this predictive problem, I started looking for a computer-based psychic test similar to what had been used in some of the research studies described above. I didn't have to look far. One of the mediums in my case studies, Joanne Gerber, had a test on her website. It was designed very much like the Zener card approach, although each trial was completely random. The digital cards could be numbers 1 through 5 or colors. Because the computer randomly selected one of the 5 options for each trial, there was no way to logically predict what card would be next. Over the course of several months, I tested myself with the physical colored cards and with Joanne's website game, using both numbers and colors. I kept track of my performance and calculated my overall hit rate. After 24 runs using 25 cards each time, which is 600 trials, my overall average was 24%. If the results were completely due to chance, I should have scored 20%. Not bad. When I analyzed a bit further, I found that I did my best using the physical color cards, which was 26%. What, baby? Followed by the computer color cards, which is 24%. Then the computer numbers, 20%. Because it's possible that the physical card's success rate was inflated by my ability to predict, I suspect that computerized success rates are a more accurate metric. Even though these results are likely to be significant, I felt that they did not tell the entire story. When I plotted the results on a distribution chart, it was clear that there were far more runs at or above the chance than there were below the chance. This is important because it demonstrates a level of consistency that is not obvious when just looking at the overall hit rate. Of the 24 runs, 13 had results better than chance, 5 had results at chance, and only 6 had results below chance. In addition, if you look at some of the extreme scores, you can see that there were times that I was able to get 10 40% and 11 44% cards correct out of 25. These were high scores. Good job.
Yeah.
These were high scores that occurred by chance. You would expect that there would also be comparable low scores, which there weren't. This was encouraging and provided more confidence. Than simply looking at the overall hit rate. Throughout the self-testing process, I also noticed some quirky patterns that would sometimes emerge between the target and the responses, which may not be entirely random. Streaks. Often I would notice that I would get several correct in a row and then seemingly lose it. On multiple sessions, I would have notes like first 10 getting 40%, or got 3 at the first 6, and then went on a missing streak. This process felt like riding a wave. If I could tap into the natural flow and rhythm, it was effortless and automatic. Then something would shift. I would drop out of the flow and have to reset my attention. Yep, good job. Correspondence. At times, I would notice strange prediction response patterns that felt like they were meaningful. For example, there were sessions where every time I chose a certain color, the actual card was blue. He said, let's say green. The actual card was blue. This observation seemed to happen most frequently with colors that were near each other on the color spectrum. So blue, green, green, yellow, orange, red. This seemed odd, but made me wonder if somehow the colors were too close together for my more subtle perceptions to accurately identify the difference. Another pattern I noticed was one off. Essentially, the color I selected was wrong, but ended up being the next card in the stack. For example, I predicted yellow and the actual card is red, but then when I flip to the next card, it's yellow. Now, if this happened occasionally, I would easily written it off as coincidence, but when it happens consistently, it starts to feel more meaningful. Is it possible that sometimes the mind is moving ahead in time? 2 choices. Relatively often, I would be focusing on the next card, waiting for an intuitive hit. I would see 2 colors in my mind. Both seemed equally likely to be correct. More often than not, I would choose one and it ended up being the other. I bring up these patterns only to point out that the reality of psi phenomena... It's not likely to be linear. If we truly are shifting our minds into a universal consciousness, it makes sense that the information received may be from a slightly different point in space or time. Perhaps this is why it is rare to find people who can consistently produce results on these tests greater than 30%. I was curious if there was anything I could learn about the psychic mediums I had studied that might help my performance be a bit more consistent. What did their brain maps look like during a psychic reading? Was there some way I could help my brain do the same thing? Would this improve accuracy or consistency?
Them.
It makes the eh sound.
Them.
Good job. One of the striking differences between Laura Lynn Jackson's brain during a mediumship and the psychic reading was the type of activation in the occipital lobe. While the mediumship reading showed the increase of the slow brain waves, the brain patterns during a psychic reading showed something quite different. During the psychic reading, Laura's brain showed a significant increase of activity in the fast brain waves, particularly in the gamma frequency, which is the fastest brain wave we are typically able to measure. After looking at a few more brains belonging to mediums, including Janet Meyer, Joanne Gerber, and Angela Diane, and Rebecca...
Chick.
After looking at a few more brains belonging to mediums, including Janet Meyer, Joanne Gerber, Angela Diane, and Rebecca and Lo Cesario, it started becoming clear that in nearly every case, the gamma activity was increasing in the back of the head during psychic readings. Below is an analysis of Joanne Gerber's brainwave activity, comparing her to baseline EEG to the EEG during a psychic reading. In this image, which is this, the darker shading represents significant increases, while lighter colors represent significant decreases of activity. Clearly, the strongest findings for Joanne were the increase of both theta and high beta in occipital lobes. As noted elsewhere, the increase of theta may help with the ability to tap into universal consciousness. We can think of an increased theta activity as the mind beginning to let go of its rigid grip on the external world and relaxing into more creative, free internal awareness. Experienced meditators in specific traditions often show patterns of increased theta and alpha activity, which is generally considered a deeper state of consciousness. In fact, the examples provided in the beginning of this chapter all occurred during sleep, which is mostly certainly a deeper state of consciousness. In addition to this increase of centralized theta, Joanne and nearly all the other psychic studies demonstrated a dramatic increase in gamma wave activity. Gamma is the fastest activity that we are typically able to measure in the brain. Depending on the researcher or clinician, it can be defined as brain waves occurring anywhere between 30 Hz and 110 Hz. This set of frequencies has gained a lot of attention in the last few years as researchers have connected to a variety of different and interesting states of consciousness. On the basic level, increases in gamma are observed when there is an increased activation. In fact, all of the EEG frequencies, gamma shows the strongest and most consistent relationship to glucose metabolism, well-known indicator of brain activity. Not surprisingly, increases in gamma are also associated with consciousness or conscious attention and focus, which led to increased activity. When these findings are increasing and useful in understanding how the brain works, these are not the responses people get excited about gamma. Gamma is also associated with states of flow or being in the zone. Researchers has demonstrated that when experts in various fields are engaged in activities related to their expertise, you see significant bursts of gamma activity. This has been shown when musicians are listening to music, as well as when expert meditators are engaged in various forms of meditation. In these instances, the gamma waves seem to be involved with an effortless doing. Rather than thinking about the situation or analyzing it, the persons performing activity are simply tapped in to the process. This is why people are interested in gamma. Who wouldn't want to live a life in a state of flow where you're able to process complex information at a high level seemingly without effort. Gamma has also been implicated in various higher states of consciousness. For example, neuropsychologist Joanne Acosta, I'm sorry, I can't say that. She's PhD. I'm sorry, one. So I'm assuming he is a PhD. Reported significant increases in the EEG band in subjects undergoing Kundalini activation. At the same time, the subjects reported being in a blissful orgasmic state which lasted several minutes. Elevated gamma has also been observed during ayahuasca visionary states and during lucid dreaming. These findings suggest that the gamma's importance extends beyond simply identifying if the brain is active or not. It also seems important for expanded states of awareness. Given this understanding, it makes sense that we would see this kind of response in the psychic brain, and this activity is most obvious in the back of the head, the occipital lobe of the brain, whose primary function is visual processing. To me, it makes sense that this area would be super activated as the psychic is literally seeing beyond their normal visual capacity. My next experiment involves exploring how I could increase gamma activation in my occipital lobes. I could use tech, but I also wondered if there was a meditative approach I could use that would work. Because I have a background in meditation, I considered which practices left me feeling activated rather than tranced out. Throughout these several month period, I was consistently working with the cards. I experimented with a variety of mental strategies to get better at the ESP games. For many of these early tests, I would close my eyes and say something like, "Show me the next number," and then go with the first number that popped in my head. Turns out this was not a terribly effective strategy. However, throughout some significant trial and error, I discovered the method that seemed to be consistently result in a higher percentage of success. The first step in the process was to shift my focus to the center of my forehead. I could usually tell if this area was activated by a tingling sensation that would occur there. Then I would imagine a window opening, allowing me to see into another layer of reality. I would intentionally let go of any real-world information or expectations and then just wait. I had to practice patience, as all of my other strategies were based on that idea that the first thing that pops in my head is likely to be the best answer. This is apparently not true. Eventually, the first thing that pops up in my mind is usually something tied to the mind, attempting to predict based on what happened previously. All this automatic analysis is going on behind the scenes, and of course, masks the ability to tune in what will happen next. By dropping these expectations and shifting the point of focus and then waiting patiently for a clear answer, my percentage increased significantly. The Hindu and yogic traditions, the third eye is associated with the sixth chakra. In Sanskrit, this chakra is named it's Ajna. I don't know how to pronounce that, which means to perceive. This is a subtle energy center located at the center of the head, behind the forehead, either at eye level or slightly above. As noted by therapist and author Anodia Judith, PhD, the function of this chakra is to see beyond the psychic world, bringing us added insight. It is a subtle energy organ that involves a psychic vision or clairvoyance. From this perspective, when the third eye center is activated and functioning properly, it enables the ability to see beyond the limitations of the psychic eyes. In addition to more esoteric descriptions, each chakra is connected to or resonates with a specific gland in the physical body. The chakra corresponds to the pineal gland, the pinecone-shaped gland located approximately at the center of the head at the eye level. This gland secretes melatonin, and hormone that is triggered by exposure of the physical eyes to certain light frequencies. And that influences our sleep/wake cycles. Increasingly, in some animal species, the pineal gland slash third eye connection is even more obvious, existing as an actual light sensitive organ on the surface of the head. It is also believed that some researchers that the pineal gland is responsible for secreting an indigenous and endogenous form of DMT, an extreme potent psychedelic. Realizing that there may be something to this third eye business, I altered my morning meditation to focus on this area. I was again able to find that tingling sensation and found my energy increasing while just sitting there. In fact, I could also feel my heart rate increasing. I wondered if this was the mystic and occult teachers what they were talking about when they use the term raising your vibration. I know what my brainwave state is most of the time, and it's actually a little on the slow side, lots of alpha waves. I wondered if this practice is actually resulting in increased gamma activity. Lucky for me, I could find out. I hooked myself up on the baseline EEG recording, then I recorded myself while I did the ESP games. I video recorded my screen so I could go back and review the exact points at which I was successful in the game. For the first run, I scored 20%, exactly average. On the second run, I scored 28%. After completing the test, I watched the video, which allowed me to see both ESP game and the EEG data stimulant simultaneously. I marked the time signature of the EEG at every point that I had successful trial on the ESP games. Then I went back and pulled out each of these success moments, collapsing them together and creating an EEG record of the success hits. I wanted to see if this data was any different from my unsuccessful trials, and if so, how. When I ran statistical comparison, it showed that there were significant differences in several bands, but especially in gamma and high gamma. In fact, when you look at the direction of the changes that took place, all the others showed less activity during the ESP hits. The only brainwave that increased during the ESP hits were high beta and gamma. It was clearly focused on the occipital regions. When I looked at the size of the change, the analysis showed that the gamma increased from 45 to 67% in the occipital regions. Interestingly, the change in the beta activity showed a decrease in frontal regions, particularly on the left side. This part of the brain is very much involved with processing information and what we might normally consider thinking. So while my occipital gamma was increasing dramatically, my frontal beta was decreasing, suggesting that the ESP hits were not something that suggesting that the ESP hits were not something that was happening as a result of conscious thought. This was all starting to make sense. The third eye is involved in psychic vision, which is processed in the brain in the same areas that normal vision is processed, that is, the occipital lobes. When you engage in psychic seeing, you are likely to activate these centers, resulting in increase of gamma activity. At the same time, it is necessary to shut down or quiet the logical, analytical left hemisphere dominant parts of the brain that essentially creates noise in the system, making it difficult to see the more subtle information. As a side note, while not working on this chapter, I began practicing with the third eye meditation again and got my highest score yet, which is 52%. The best way to develop your psychic skills is to practice. You can purchase a deck of Zener cards online, but that is really not necessary. You can use a regular deck of playing cards and predict black or red. You could also predict the suits. You can also find apps for your smartphone or tablet with ESP games based on the same principle. I recommend Are You Psychic by AI Creative Software. This app allows you to choose from several different virtual decks of cards, as well as the option to have every trial to be completely randomized or drawn from the deck of 25 cards. Practicing psychic games by using a deck of Zener type cards can be very educational. By methodically working with these games, paying careful attention to your feeling state, taking notes, tracking performances, and being honest with yourself. It is possible to develop an understanding of how the psi process works for you, how to shift your attention and consciousness for optimal results. For myself, I was able to develop a subtle awareness that signaled me when I was on the right track, which then helped guide me in later sessions. Here are some of my observations from several months of practice. My experience has been that every different format I use takes a bit of adjustment. The first few times I try a new deck of cards or a different computerized ESP game, I usually don't do very well. It is almost as if my brain must learn how to work with that particular system. As you start with a new approach or a new format, be patient and allow yourself some time to adapt. The feeling. Frequently, I have noticed a hard to define felt sense that would come over me when I know the correct answer. It's like a confidence or clarity. When I have this feeling, I'm nearly always correct in my prediction. When I do not have this feeling, the results seem random. During these non-confidence trials, I could sometimes feel my mind trying to predict or extrapolate a pattern. If you can find this feeling and learn to recognize it, it may be possible to activate it intentionally. At times, I have found that I do not do well at the beginning of the deck of cards. I might miss the first 8 in a row before I settle into the session. For this reason, it may be useful to go through 10 or so cards at the beginning as a warm-up. If you consider psychic ability as a skill, this idea makes a lot of sense. If you're an athlete or a musician, you most certainly warm up before a performance. It is an opportunity to find the feeling before it counts. This is a well-known observation in psi research and describes the tendency for people to do worse or overextend sessions. Just as it may be important to have a bit of warm-up before beginning, it also may be important to each session containing a certain time frame. It is not entirely clear why a performance seems to drop over time, but it may be due to boredom and lack of engagement. Doing the same thing repeatedly may not present enough motivation to fully tap in. In addition to keeping your sessions contained, you may also want to mix it up. Try something different to keep it fresh or keep track of your results and all the variables you notice as a way to increase your engagement. All of the mental approaches I tried, the one that seemed to work best involved looking through my third eye. I would do this by simultaneously directing my attention to the center of my brain and the center of my forehead. I would then relax my entire face and scalp, visualizing my brain and forehead as active and open. I usually knew this approach was working when I felt slightly tingling sensation on my forehead. Try the following meditation for a few weeks to see if this enhances your psi performance. Take a moment to settle the body. Relax any muscles that are holding unnecessary tension. Relax the breathing. Allow it to flow naturally and easily. No effort, just smooth, gentle, long, slow, and natural breathing. Feel the belly expand with each inhalation. The belly contract with each exhalation. Now draw your attention to the forehead, the space between your eyes, or perhaps slightly higher. Imagine with each inhalation, breathing purple light into this space. Honestly, I don't really feel comfortable helping with like meditation like this. Like, this is nice for this author to try to help with that, but I don't think that's for me. So if you want to read this book and if you want to know more about how to meditate better, like obviously you could read this part of the chapter, or you can there's YouTube videos and stuff like that. But yeah, the rest of this chapter is just helping you with meditation, which is nice, but I just don't really feel like that's for me to be giving you that information. So